Welcome to another episode of Things You Didn't Know About the Holocaust. I'm Phyllis Zimbler Miller, and I have two overseas guests today. Deborah Bruner is in the UK, and Artur Lefschitz is in near Minsk, right? Is that correct?
In
Which
Minsk.
is in Belarus, which is what we're going to talk about. So they're the co-founders of the Together Plan. You can see their thingy, a UK-based nonprofit that's dedicated to supporting vulnerable Jewish communities in Belarus through cultural heritage, education, community building initiatives, ancestral archival research, and storytelling. They also lead the Jewish Tapestry Project, which focuses on uncovering and preserving the Jewish history in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. But let's start today with Belarus and the Holocaust. And did it exist in 1939? What's the story here?
Did it exist in 1939? Well, part of it did, but it wasn't Belarus as a country. It was a region of the Soviet Union. But the sort of Eastern Poland became Western Belarus in 1939 when Stalin and Hitler carved up the Soviet Union.
Right.
Um,
I always make this clear to my audiences who don't necessarily know it. The Nazis occupied Poland in September 1st, 1939, but under their secret agreement, they divided up Poland so that the Russians had the eastern half, which we're going to talk about. And then until June 1941, when the Nazis broke the non-aggression pact. Okay, so now we're 1939, and the Soviet Union gets Belarus. Okay.
Yeah. So the Soviet Union gets part of Poland. It gets the eastern part of Poland, and that often causes a lot of confusion with people because people often say to us, "Oh, my family came from Poland, not from Belarus," and we'll say, "Well, where did they come from?" And they'll say somewhere like Grodno, and Grodno is now part of Belarus. And this happens to us all the time. And we go, yeah, well, that was Poland, but it's not anymore. It's now Belarus, but it's not Soviet Belarus anymore. It's independent Belarus. So it's really complicated. It's difficult to unpick, but it's terribly important. And that region that was the eastern part of Poland that became Soviet Belarus was at one point called the Kresy. Often a lot of people don't even know about that. Kresy beginning with a K, Kresy. And it's that sort of, it's a sort of strip of land from north to south, which included that part of the land that became Belarus. And it is a really important part of the sort of the Holocaust history. And there are places within that part of the land that got carved up that were the sort of it was the sort of the front line when Hitler invaded, or the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. That's where they came across. They came into Brest, for example. Brest was the sort of entry point into what was then the Soviet Union. It was now part of the Soviet Union, but had previously 2 years earlier been Poland.
Right. That's what's so confusing. And this is when the Einsatzgruppen started their brutal activities that we call
Absolutely.
Holocaust by bullets.
And that was Operation Barbarossa.
Yes,
So Operation Barbarossa became what was the invasion of Nazi Germany into the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June in 1941.
exactly. So Artur, did you grow up in Belarus?
Yeah, I was born in Belarus. I grew up in Belarus. I spent all my childhood in Belarus. And just to go back to what Deborah said about the division, when the western part of, eastern part of Poland was divided, and when we talk about the Holocaust, it gave, I think, on one hand, people um, accuse Stalin and Hitler for that sort of a separation, for that division. On the other hand, the Jews who lived in a part that became Belarus, a lot of them managed to escape when they were running away from when the Nazis invaded the actual territory of the Soviet Union that belonged, part of the Poland that belonged to Soviet Union at that time. they were able to have time to be evacuated east, which, not talking about the majority of the Jews in Brest and more of the western areas, but some of them who lived closer to the eastern part, they were able to have some time at least to evacuate and escape, and that actually saved their lives. Otherwise, because if the Hitler would march through all of the Poland, no one would be able to escape. And there were a lot of Jews who moved from Poland to what now is Belarus and used to be sort of Eastern Poland, towns like Slonim, Grodno, Baranovichi, Brest, who were escaping from the Nazi Poland and who found their shelter in eastern part of Poland. At that time, it was western part of Belarus. So on one hand, it was an accusation that Stalin had divided Poland, but on the other hand, for us as the Jews, we were able to kind of have some time at least to evacuate. I mean, unfortunately, not a lot of people, not a lot of Jews have managed to do that, and around million Jews were killed in Holocaust during the Nazi period,
He's
which
talking
is
about a very specific period. I was just telling Deborah, I'm very careful with numbers because we're talking the Holocaust, 6 million Jews. So when we say a certain number, we're talking about a very specific time or period. That when he mentions that number. But wait, I want to roll back for 1 second. One of the ways that Jews, ironically, were saved in Eastern Poland and Western Belarus is that the Soviets, being communists, uh, rounded up a lot of capitalist Jews and others and sent them to Siberia, which ironically saved many people's lives. I remember at the kosher bakery years ago here in Los Angeles, the woman behind the counter would tell me the stories of how she would walk miles in Siberia to try and find food for her little brother. On the other hand, she survived.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we often find make connections to people who have survivor stories because they were incarcerated in gulags and labor camps in sort of the depths of Siberia. So if they were able to survive that, then the Nazis didn't get that far, and so yeah, they weren't captured by the Nazis. So it was the lesser of two evils.
And and oh, I wanted to talk about Andrew's army, but that about the Gulag, that's probably a little bit too afield of. I was trying to tell someone in synagogue the other day about some of the people were released from the Gulag after a couple of years, some of the Jews, to go join Andrew's army, and then there's a whole other story there. Let's stick to Belarus. So what happened in Belarus after the Nazis broke the pack?
So, I mean, Artur, you can embellish on your side, so Operation Barbarossa, the Nazis invaded. It was a very fast and a very quick invasion, and a lot of the sort of people they didn't think it would come into the Soviet Union because they were they had an alliance with Hitler, with Stalin and Hitler were allies, so they weren't expecting it, although there were rumblings of it. And then the 22nd of June happened, and it took everybody by surprise. There are lots of stories, for example, that we have translated in the publications that we've brought to press, of children. These are the children's memories of being at summer camp, for example. And they were away from their parents because they were at summer camp. It was the summer, it was June. And bombs suddenly started falling on them. Planes flew in, bombs fell, and there was absolute chaos. And these sort of children were sort of rounded up by the people that were looking after them in these summer camps, and they were trying to sort of reunite them back with their parents. And people were displaced anyway because in the summers people go to their dachas and they move around the country. And it all happened very, very quickly. Everybody was taken by surprise. And Minsk had been it was the capital, and it was reached very quickly. And Jews were rounded up into the ghettos, and it was in the Soviet Union. It was specifically in Belarus, but also in other parts of the Soviet Union. It was a very different approach. It wasn't as orderly as it was in Western Europe. So, you talk to or you read books like Bloodlands by Timothy Schneider, who will say that, as horrific as it was in Western Europe, it pales into insignificance, the brutality in Belarus, and it really was the Bloodlands, and so these were, for example, the Minsk ghetto was unbelievably brutal. I mean, it was just brutal. It was a brutal ghetto. It was supposed to have had a wall built around it, but it never happened. It was a porous ghetto because it was surrounded by barbed wire. So people could get in and out underneath the wire, but at great cost. People were being killed. Children were sneaking in and out. There was a resistance movement that was started, and what was very interesting is that the Naliboki forest, which had been Poland before 1939, so now we're in that region that we were just talking about, had very, very dense forests, really dense forests. And the Jewish communities, people knew how to navigate these forests, but the Nazis didn't. And this is why there became a very strong resistance resistance movement, which was shown in the film Defiance, of the Bielskis, right? So that was where they were. And interestingly, in the stories that we have translated and published, quite a lot of non-Jewish communists helped their communist neighbors, Jewish neighbors, escape from the ghettos and get them out to the partisans. But to do that, to reach the partisans and to be accepted as a partisan, you had to have a weapon. Right. So, and how do you have a weapon if you're a prisoner in a ghetto? So this was why people were sneaking in and out of the ghettos. It was an unbelievable situation, but they were running away from just horror, absolute horror in these ghettos.
Now, I have recently read, my husband's a military too fan of history, that there were three prongs of Operation Barbarossa into Russia, and that Hitler's generals had said only one, and Hitler had insisted on three, which whatever book I was just reading said that partly led to the downfall. So I'm just trying, I know it's not the northern one. So are we talking about the middle push or the southern push?
So I would say we're talking about the middle push because there was a push into sort of the Latvian sort of that part, which was north. Then there was the into Ukraine and the southern region. So yeah, there was
We're talking about
there were four Einsatzgruppen squads, and who sort of fanned out as part of Operation Barbarossa.
I have to just share with you this story because I published it in the 70s when I was in a Jewish newspaper in Philadelphia, but it has never left me what I have done it. And it's the story of the camp where in June of 1941, Jewish kids and non-Jewish kids were being taught to be good little Soviets. The pact was broken. A mother took off her diamond ring, gave it to a Polish peasant, and sent him to the camp to get her daughter, which he did. And all the children and the Jewish children were separated and they were all killed. And to this day, and I don't want to tell you how old I am, but I'm pretty old, I have always wondered whether I would have had the foresight to do that. It haunts me to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, you do. I often think, what would I do in that situation? Yeah, it is very haunting. The whole thing is very haunting. Yeah.
So Artur, I'll ask you both, but what got you into this, so to speak?
Well, I mean, my story is quite long, but to cut it short, I was born in the Soviet Union, and I was raised in the Soviet Union, and my my great grandfather had the family had six children, and all of them immigrated to America before the revolution, and only my great grandfather for some reason decided to come back for some business or probably, to get his girlfriend also to the States. And the revolution hit the ground and he couldn't go back. And he made his life here, and that's my family route. And my grandfather, throughout the Soviet period, and has kept corresponding with the family in America. And when the perestroika came, they came to visit us. They were fully Americanized. They didn't speak any Russian. There was a family that kind of didn't have their sort of Yiddish slash Russian slash Polish roots. But and then I kind of throughout this relationship, I appeared to be when there was still Soviet Union. I flew to Nashville, Tennessee, and I studied in a Jewish school in a Chabad synagogue, and that's where my kind of a Jewish background began. Because before that, I knew that I was Jewish because of my last name, but I didn't know anything about Judaism. My grandfather secretly was telling me a few bits, teaching me a few Yiddish words, but that was it. We didn't practice any Judaism. The family didn't do anything. And that's how I got into it. Then I went to Israel for a year to the boarding school, where I went to learn Hebrew. And in Nashville, I had my bar mitzvah, and I got myself into my kind of a Jewish background. And then I came back to Belarus. I decided that I don't want to live in Israel. I want to go back to Belarus. And I decided that I can use my knowledge somewhere else. And I came back, and that's how I started my Jewish journey with doing, because I have a legal education. I graduated from a law school, and I was interested in human rights and as well as the Jewish rights. And I got involved with the organization that is called the Union of Councils for Jews in Former Soviet Union, which was a refusnik set-up organization, and that I was working with them as a volunteer to start with. And I was heading their office in Minsk, and we were doing monitoring of anti-Semitism and xenophobia in the country. And that's where I've started, and I got involved in different charities, and I was involved in the Jewish community, and then I met Deborah, and then we set up the Together Plan, and then we are where we are, and that's in short. I mean,
Yes, I understand. Wait, but I have one question. Clearly, your great grandfather and grandfather survived. Where were they during the Holocaust?
well, my grandfather actually was sent, as you mentioned, to the north and to the Stalin's camp because he was an engineer, and that's how he actually survived the war. The other part of the family was in partisans. So my story is quite simple, and as many stories as other Jewish people here. So basically, thanks to Stalin, we've survived the Holocaust, and thanks to partisans as well. So
Now, Deborah, how did you get involved in this?
That's a very good question. So I set up a twinning between my synagogue, my temple in North London, and a small community in the north of Belarus, in a place called Polotsk.
Oh, wait. But why did you do this? You just picked it
Why
up.
did I do it?
What?
Okay, backtrack. Okay, so you want the whole story. Okay,
I
so
find it interesting.
no, it is interesting. So there was another synagogue in North London that used to bring children from the southern region of Belarus every year for summer programs. I think it was more for respite than for sort of anything religious, because these children came from the area that was impacted by the radiation from the Chernobyl disaster. And they couldn't do this program one year, and so they reached out to us and said, would you be able to hold this project for us for one summer, because we don't want to stop the continuity of the project. So we had 11 children that came over, and I had really nothing to do with that project, only in as much as I home hosted 2 of the children. So I had a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. One came from Mozyr in Belarus, and the other came from Mogilev. And it was a very impactful experience. My own children were very taken by these children. They were very interested in who they were, why they had so much need, because you could see they had a lot of material need. And it was a very good experience for our community members because I got to know other members of my community who were also home hosting these children. So it brought us all together as a community. And I was just really interested in these children in as much as when they came into the synagogue, and they came through a Jewish organization. They didn't even know what the building was. They were completely disconnected. There was no connection to the sort of Jewish space that they were in at all, and which I found very interesting. My own family, my personal family came from Poland. But my then husband, it was his family were Holocaust survivors from Hungary, and Hungary was part of the had become well, became part of the Soviet Union after the war. So they had lived under the communists. So I always had a real interest in Jews who had sort of lived through the Soviet experience and also the war, the Holocaust, Eastern Europe, Poland. It was always something I was very immersed in and had read an awful lot about and took a great deal of interest in. So when these children came from, sort of very early post-Soviet, Belarus, who had no connection to their Judaism, yet came through a Jewish organization, I was very interested. And after these children went back to Belarus, we decided as a community that this was a very interesting experience, and why didn't we then twin our community? So I was asked if I would kind of set that up. I didn't know what I was doing, but I kind of followed my nose, and we ended up being twinned with this community, this little Jewish community in Polotsk in the Vitebsk region in the north of Belarus. And I traveled out there, and my paths then crossed with Artur. I was introduced to Artur by another UK charity or non-profit. And as you can see, he speaks very good English, and I didn't really know how to navigate Belarus. And so I kind of drove him mad for sort of 6 months with emails and sort of saying, can you tell me about this and can you tell me about that? And he was a fantastic guide, and in the end he became our guide. I went back to Belarus. He showed me a lot more of the country, and I saw the need of not just one community that we were twinned with, but real need amongst the Jews of Belarus, and lots of ghetto survivors, people who'd never left the places of where they'd experienced their suffering and their losses. And the more I sort of went, the more I spoke to Artur, the more I kind of got sucked down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And that's how the twinning became the Together Plan, and that's where we're at. That's why we got to where we're at now.
It's a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing it. But I still want to know who or what is Belarus? When was it established? I'm still confused.
Okay, Artur, you can. That's your part.
Okay, so I mean, it's the Belarus with the territory that it exists now came to be established as as the Soviet Republic,
Uh-huh.
1939, because that's where the territory came to the Soviet Union and
Okay.
was a part of the Soviet Belarus. Now, part of the Belarus was established after the revolution, in 1917. There were a few bits of the movement sort of around when Belarus was moving back and forth, but that's kind of a completely different sort of
Right. Okay.
conversation. But the Belarus exists within the territory that it exists after 1939. Now, the eastern part of Belarus, interestingly enough, that was bordering Poland around the Minsk area, interesting fact, had four official languages. And those four official languages were Belarusian, Russian, Polish, and Yiddish.
Interesting.
But because of the sort of a Stalin's attitude to the Jews and the whole sort of the regime, they've started to oppress the not just Jewish communities, not just the Jewish synagogues, but as well as the churches, Catholic, Russian Orthodox. There was an atheism coming into the country, and everything was closed down. There was a Jewish theater. Minsk itself, before the war, had over 80 synagogues. Uh,
80?
8080, correct. Some of the Minsk in 1901 was over 50% Jewish. Uh, and the reason for that, because the Belarus itself was right in the middle of the Pale of Settlement, which was from the Baltics to the Black Sea. And that's how the formation of sort of Belarus Jewish story began. And because of so many small shtetls were, the largest population was Jewish, that has influenced the Holocaust period. And the influence was that the Jews and non-Jews lived side by side. There were Belarusians or Russians or Ukrainians living in the same shtetl, and it's not that the Jews who spoke their language, it's them who spoke Yiddish to communicate. So it was quite amazing, and I mean, I'm very curious what would happen if there wouldn't be Second World War, how the country would be off now. I mean, but hey.
So
So,
yeah, keep going. But
oh,
when did Belarus, you have a government, right? There's a Belarus government.
of course, there's a Belarus government. There is
When was it formed? In other words, did it get independence from the Soviet Union?
Yes, it was formed in 1991, when the whole Soviet Union collapsed and when there was an agreement made in Belovezhskaya Pushcha, actually in Belarus, when sort of was signed by the Soviet regime and declared the Soviet Union has been um, came to the end, and there were independent states, and that where Belarus got its independence. And that's when the Belarus started its own journey as an independent state, as an independent country.
No, okay, this is 1991. What languages at that point became official?
Belarusian and Russian. There are two official languages. And the reason for that is because you could see that in many other countries, like in Ukraine. I mean, now in Ukraine they speak the official language is Ukrainian. In other countries, and we do have two official languages. And the reason for that is that's very simple, because there was such a huge Russification during the Soviet period. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of people in Belarus spoke Russian. And obviously, to make them stop speaking Russian suddenly would be a disaster. And I think that's the right decision to have two languages, so people have an option whether to speak Belarusian. So if you basically, the problem is if you're Belarusian, you understand both Russian and Belarusian. But if you, for example, live in Russia and you speak only Russian, you would never, like majority of the words from Belarusian, you wouldn't understand, because it's closer to the Ukrainian, some of the Polish words as well, and some of the Yiddish words as well. I mean, Yiddish has influenced a lot this part of the Soviet Union.
So in 1991, when Belarus became a country, what happened to the Jews? I mean, in other words, the Jews didn't really even know there were still synagogues
Yeah.
crumbling. I mean, what happened?
Well, there was one synagogue, basically one active synagogue during the Soviet period in Belarus, in Minsk. It was a wooden building, and it was kind of a synagogue which was official, and
I
so
know.
you had to report who is coming, who is going, and so it was like a very sort of a Soviet type of a synagogue, the same way as it was Soviet type of church and cathedrals. But I think the Jews have started sort of feeling themselves more Jewish when Gorbachev came to power, when the whole perestroika and openness of the country, and that's when Jews started. Sort of, there was a big wave of immigration to Israel, to America. There was still immigration in 1970s, where Jews had to go They had to go to the centers. Those they had to go to Rome, or they had to go to Vienna, and then they were kind of it was an intermediate point, and then they were sort of either going to Israel or to America, to Australia. There was a still, I think, during the Brezhnev period, there was a bit of a movement towards that. But the general Jewish population have started feeling more Jewish during the perestroika and closer to 1990s. That's where they were able to talk to their sort of community outside of the Soviet Union. That's when they kind of started openly admitting that they're Jewish. I mean, I can't say that they were not admitting being Jewish during the Soviet period. I mean, I remember my grandfather, my father. I mean, when they were kind of friends coming, I mean, they could call each other a Jew or joke about the Jews, but it was more of a sort of a inner circle conversations, not outside conversation, as they would call that. And they would call, or you can talk about anything in your kitchen, but outside of your kitchen, hush. You're not allowed to talk about anything. Or you can criticize the government, but in the kitchen. There's a very interesting joke about this, which I'll tell you just to. So let's say, I don't know, Brezhnev and Reagan, two presidents, they meet, and Reagan says, look, we have a democracy in the United States. Everybody can go out to the White House and say that Reagan is stupid, Reagan is a fool, and nothing is going to happen to him because we have a democracy. And Brezhnev says, "Well, I mean, we have a more democracy. Anybody can go out to the Red Square and say that Reagan is a fool and Reagan is very stupid. Nothing is going to happen." Uh,
That's good.
that's exactly what was happening in Soviet Union. You were able to talk in your kitchen, but outside of that, it was quite dangerous.
So now let's go back to Deborah. So now we've got like what, 35 years or 34 since this opening. And how is the Together Plan bringing out recovering Jewish life that was snuffed out?
Okay, so we're doing it in several different ways. So to start with, we are collecting stories. We're looking to connect to people who have their ancestry in Belarus, who are outside of Belarus, who can fill in pieces of the puzzle. Often they don't know that they have pieces of the puzzle to fill in, but they do.
Okay, give us an example.
So, I mean, examples are, for example, we made a contact to somebody whose relative was a survivor from a place called Voronava in Belarus, very close to the Lithuanian border, and all the Jews there were killed. Now, but he was one of the few that survived, and in a DP camp, I think it was in Austria somewhere, he wrote his memoirs. He wrote on exercise book paper. He didn't just write about the destruction of the community. He wrote about daily life in Jewish Voronava. Amazing piece. And then he ended up going to the States, and this manuscript was found in a box after he died. And it was then translated onto a typewriter. And then it has recently been published, very, very recently. And when I met with this person who had this relative and told me this story, I said to him, "Where's the manuscript?" Thinking it was, in a museum somewhere. He said, "It's here. It's in my house." And I said, "Can I see it?" And I went to visit him, and he showed it to me. I mean, it's an amazing piece. But he also gave me a copy of the first translation that was done on a typewriter with all the Tipex marks and all the crosses, which is amazing. And I read it, and it's just the most amazing written piece. And through that piece, you learn about the community and you learn about the life there. And this is what I'm saying. And by connecting to these people don't realize that they have that story, and that story fills in a gap in a piece of what was Jewish life like in Belarus before the war, right? And you learn so much from that. But people have photographs and they have memories and they have artifacts. And so this is a part of the reason why we call the Together Plan, because when you start to sort of learn about those stories and you write those personal stories, then what we're doing is we're building up a library of these stories that each connect to different parts, different towns, different shtetls. Now, the long game is that we are going to be raising money to, we've been talking about this for a long time, but to create a digital a website, a digital space, which will have an interactive map that will basically pin drop all of the sites in Belarus, right? Not just the sites of the past, but also where do you find Jewish life today,
Mm.
right? So it will be a one-stop shop to finding out, where are the cemeteries, where are the memorials, where are the massacre sites, where are the abandoned synagogues, because there are still a lot of abandoned synagogues, and each of those synagogues tell a story. There's a lot of intangible heritage, places where the wooden synagogues once stood. There are none now. So there is an enormous amount of history there. And then places where people lived who are famous people. Mark Chagall, who came from, Vitebsk, the founding fathers of Israel, Chaim Weizmann, there are, Menachem Begin, there are Sutin, the artist, the spiritual leaders, the Soloveitchiks, the Chofetz Chaim, all of these people. Eliezer ben Yehuda, who's turned Hebrew into a modern language. All of this happened in Belarus. And it's an absolute treasure trove, and it's a really missing piece. It's really, really important that we, as the Jewish people in the diaspora, know this history.
I'm trying to figure out, first of all, in the description of this thing, can I give an email where anyone who has any connection of material that they might want to share with you from Belarus? So we'll do that, right? We'll give it.
Absolutely, and they connect us to us through Jewish Tapestry Project in the States or the Together Plan in the UK. Either way.
Okay, so basically it's the same project, you're just using a different name. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, are there any Holocaust centers around the world yet that are starting to use your material? Does anyone realize what a treasure trove you're collecting?
So we're building our connections to. We've got a relationship now with the Ghetto Fighters House in Israel. We've made connections to the Center for Jewish History in New York. We have a relationship with the National Library of Israel, and we are open to conversations with people, and Holocaust museums and Holocaust educators all around the world, because the sort of USP, I think, of what we're doing is that we have our team in Belarus. I'm based in the UK, and we've got the team in the States, but we have Artur and the team and our archivists in Belarus. And the other thing that we do is we help people find their records, their ancestral records, in the Belarus archives as well, which also informs us of the past. It also helps us to get into the archives and do that research too, which is the other sort of part of the picture.
By USP, you meant unique selling point. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. We're coming close to the end of the interview. So I think this is very important. And as I said, I have a puzzle, and there it says Belarus, but really, I never hear Belarus mentioned as a separate entity. Uh, Perhaps I'm just not in the right circles, but I'm just saying I would really like to help get out the word of this rich region that didn't that got subsumed with other regions and should instead be part of its own history.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And one of the things that we also say, because one of the things we've done is we've created a Holocaust education program for teenagers, which focuses on what happened in Belarus and the Soviet Union. So rather than starting your journey or learning about Auschwitz as the first thing you learn about, that was the final solution. And what we say in the program is you can't understand the final solution until you know what the other solutions were. And what a lot of people don't understand is that, and I know you don't like to quote figures, so I'm going to say approximately 2.7 million of the 6 million were killed in the Soviet Union. Now, a lot of people don't know that because most Holocaust education focuses on Western Europe, the ghettos of Western Europe, right? You talk about, Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz or
Right.
Treblinka or these places. People know them, right? They don't know what happened in the Soviet Union, but it is incredibly important to know because you can't fully understand the Holocaust until you know what happened in the Soviet Union. And you're absolutely right. We do have to give Belarus, airtime. It plays a very, very important place in history, and it is a black hole. That's why we feel that our role is very important.
Absolutely. That's why I wanted you on the show because I know it's a black hole and I want to help fill that black hole. So
Thank you.
it's just thank you both for the amazing work you're doing. I really hope let's share this as widely as possible and let's see if we can get some attention. I already have an idea to recommend when this goes live for someone, Holocaust Museum, looking for material. Okay, here's some nice is not the right word, some very interesting material. And so perhaps I could have the link also to how to get that student. You said you have a student curriculum about Belarus?
So it's on our website and it's called Making History Together. And anybody can contact the Together Plan, so contact at thetogetherplan.com or make MHT, because it's Making History Together, MHT at thetogetherplan.com. And, just ask about it and we can, get in touch with people.
Excellent. Okay. I thank you both very much for coming on this show. I
Thank
thank
you.
my listeners. And as I end each of these programs and the things that you didn't know about the Holocaust podcast, I say, may the victims, may the memory of the victims and those who tried to save them be a blessing forever.